very much for doing this, Marius. Welcome. And I guess to get us going, tell us a little bit of what a day looks like for Marius.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me on the show and talking to me about TM1py, which I like to do a lot. So my typical day has changed quite a bit since April. Like before April, I was a consultant in the Swiss team, I'd be on projects. And then at night or on the weekends, I would maintain TM1py. And since April, Cubewise has me allocated 100% to develop the project. And that's great. So now I finally get enough time to develop the project. Like we've seen already some fruits of that development with the release last week. I'm sure many of you have seen it. Maybe you already touched it. I think it's quite good. Feedback was good. I have enough time to maintain some of the side projects to TM1py, like Rush TI or KubeCalc, or if you, I don't know, if you're into an MDX, maybe check out MDXPy. This is all the stuff I can work on now. And also I'm engaged on projects and trainings with customers as well. So it's a pretty diverse day for me now.
Fantastic, fantastic. Certainly, yeah, the days must go quick.
Absolutely.
And I guess taking us back to where it all began, what sparked the idea for TM1py?
Yeah, I think the inception point was probably the introduction of the REST API in the TM1 server, because this is what made it possible in the beginning to create TM1py at all. And then it sort of started off as a hobby project. Like I just wanted to bring two things together that I like to work with, TM1 and Python. And now you see people using TM1py for machine learning or number crunching, Power BI or Apache Airflow, and like there's lots of use cases now people are using it for. And I didn't really imagine those use cases. I just sort of wanted a way to script Python in TM1. That's how it started. But in a way, this development isn't really surprising, with Python being the Swiss pocket knife that it is. Kind of makes sense that it grows in all directions. Yeah.
Fantastic, fantastic. All right. And what is the place of TM1py and I guess the wider TM1 ecosystem?
I'm actually trying to answer that question in 2 weeks at the TM1 Horizon conference, but maybe I could like highlight that a bit high level. I'll try to share my screen here. Give me a second. There it is. So that's a slide I was actually preparing for the Horizon conference. I think this is probably like the default setup of your TM1 model, right? You have a TM1 server in the middle that has all the goodness, all the business logic and the rules, the hierarchies, all the data is in there. And then below, you sort of have like business logic in TI, maybe some administrative logic to keep everything going. And then you expose TM1 to the end users through front ends, right? And I think that, like if you're a good TM1er, you upgrade to the latest front ends with Planning Analytics for Excel and PAW. Maybe, sorry. So maybe you're also using Applico UX as a front end. But this is like, I think until here, we don't really need TM1py. So this is all going, and until recently, we didn't have a need for TM1py. But now let me show you what we can do with TM1py and how we can add value. So for instance, when you want to bring data from the TM1 server to like third-party tools like Power BI, you can do that quite easily with TM1py. Or perhaps your Power users are into Python, or you have developers who want to get insights from the data and want to play with data. You can use Jupyter Notebooks. That's also a really cool tool, which I think goes very well with TM1. And then TM1py, you see here in the middle, is like the bridge sort of that brings it together. And then maybe we could separate this map in like front end and back end, and you'd see that I think most of the use cases for TM1py they're more in the back end. Like I think business logic we can also express with TM1py. Like I'm not saying in all cases, and we don't have to. We can use TI for what we used to use TI, but sometimes when the complexity is really high, it may make sense to use TM1py instead. That's something you could look into. And also, whenever you're trying to retrieve data from outside the environment, you can use TM1py to query data from any API essentially and bring it to TM1. Let me give you 2 examples. Like one thing that I've showed in the past is that it's actually pretty straightforward to query foreign exchange rates from an API, bring it into an exchange rate cube. Right? That can save you time, especially some companies are still doing it manually, and that's error prone and not a funny task. So you can do that with TM1py. Or another one, the other day someone asked me if it was possible to build a dimension from a SharePoint page. And I looked it up, and yeah, it's not that complex. You can query the SharePoint page with Python and then build a dimension with TM1. So this is like the kind of connectivity to other systems that opens up the TM1 server in a way like it wasn't possible before. So that's a good use case. And maybe let me give you one more use case here. I think in many companies you don't have one TM1 server, but you have many, right? You sort of have your business laid out in different TM1 instances, which is technically makes sense so that it can sort of scale better. You could scale over different machines, and it makes things stable. And TM1py can help you to sort of bring everything together, administrate things, and also express logic in a multi-instance way. Okay, so that was really quick, but if you want to like learn more about this, in 2 weeks, I'm going to discuss it in way more depth.
Fantastic. All right, and we'll make sure that that there's a link there for that conference as well. Excellent. All right. So I guess what differentiates TM1py from existing scripting capabilities within TM?
Yeah. I think in TM1 we used to have TI and rules, right? And if you embrace TM1py, now we have a third option, which is TM1py. And I think the rules they stay as is. TM1py cannot in any way substitute a rule. But if you compare it to TI, there's a few differences here. Like I think Python is really like a first-class citizen among the scripting languages. And it can add value when you have a layer of complexity, which is hard to address with TI. So that would be one thing that if you have a really complex business problem, you may want to address it with Python, because Python is a more high-level language. It's more powerful, and it's more expressive and concise. So I mean, that would probably be the key differentiator, that it's just more powerful, and yeah, and it also runs multi-instance, right?
Yep.
That's the 2 points.
Excellent. Cool. All right. And how can TM1py, and you mentioned it a little bit earlier there, I guess. How can TM1py add value in a multi-instance environment? Yeah.
You know that the modern TM1 frontends like POR and Applico UX, they're like multi-instance by design. You could build a dashboard that sort of connects 2 or 3 instances, and like the end user wouldn't maybe even notice. But on the back end, currently, we're a bit limited that we cannot really express logic across instance, right? I mean, now you could argue that with ODBO, we can sort of do it, but ODBO isn't really supported anymore, and it's also really bad, like it's slow and stuff. And so this is, I think, one of the killer features of TM1py, that we can connect to 1 instance or 10, right? You write your script, you write 1 script, and you're really flexible there on the back end. And I think that would be the value that you bring with TM1py.
And obviously this is a community-based project now, right? How can others get involved in I guess the ongoing evolution of TM1py, and how can others help you lead the way to improving this further?
Yeah, TM1py really thrives on the contribution from the community, and it has gone a long way already. It started off as like sort of my hobby project, but now for the last release, I think we've seen contributions from 6 or 7 people. So it's gone a long way, and the project really needs contribution, and that's what keeps it going and growing. That people use it and also improve it, right? Keep the feedback loop going. That's really important, and that's also a point that why we made it open source, so that it can grow with everyone who uses it, and it can get better. And it's a perfect foundation to build something now with applied to so many companies now. And also to answer your question, how do you get involved? I think there's two ways now. If you're familiar with Git, you can, if you have like a suggestion or you want to fix a bug, you can go on GitHub and create a merge request and create a merge request to bring in your change into the project. But that, of course, requires you to be familiar with Git. And if you're not familiar, but you still found a bug or you missed something, then you can just open an issue and sort of describe what you want to be built. And then, yeah, the community is often taking care of that.
Excellent. Okay. And I guess if we're loving what we're hearing here, what can we do to learn more about TM1py?
Oh, maybe a good place to start would be to join the TM1 Horizon conference I mentioned before. We do have, I think, more than 10 presentations on TM1py. There's some customers presenting and some abstracts and insights. That's a good place to start. But I mean, ultimately, if you really want to learn something, you have to do it, right? You have to get your hands on and build something, definitely.
Excellent, excellent. All right, so we'll just pop a link in that chat again for the QWise conference Horizon coming up in just under 2 weeks.
Cool.
So make sure you sign up for that if you haven't already. All right, thank you very much, Marius, for sharing that. I'm sure there's a few questions already coming in, so keep those coming, and we'll get to those at the end in the Q&A session. I'm going to pass over to Marius now, so he's going to give us a few quick demos on some of the diverse ways you can implement TM1py into your environment. So sit back and enjoy that, and I'll be back for the Q&A session shortly. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll take over in a second. I just before we start with the demos, the stuff that I wanted to show, it's not like blueprints or things that you could take to your production and deploy tomorrow. It's more like ideas and inspirations of things you can do. I wanted to show like a diverse range of things you can do. Now, let me share my screen here. Okay. So the first thing I wanted to show is Jupyter Notebook. So what we want to do is I want to show how we can use Python, TM1py, and Jupyter Notebook to bring TM1 data into Jupyter and then play around with it. So maybe in case you didn't come across this tool, it's essentially like an interactive Python console that allows you to code and play with data, and also like to sort of execute the code in little like chunks, break it down. And it is very, very popular among data scientists, but it's generally useful if you're dealing with data. So what we want to do is we want to take data from this cube view, the sales cube, and then bring it into a data frame and play around. So let me show you how to do this. So first here, we're going to do some imports. We're going to import all the popular data science libraries like Pandas, Plotly, Excel, Wings, and of course, TM1py. Then here, this line of code, it establishes the connection to TM1. So this is part of TM1py. This is the connection. And now, with one line of code here, we're calling the function execute view data frame shaped. And that function, it gives us a Pandas data frame in the shape of the cube view. So you see that we have the same columns and rows as in the cube view. And before we actually like do something with the data, let's first like transform it a little bit. So we want to have everything. We don't want strings. We want everything as float, so as numeric data. And we also want to replace the NaN with zeros. And now we have a data frame that we can actually use. And we're not going to do anything like too funky here. I'm just going to like order and plot certain things just to show you what you can do and what you like, in which ways you can sort of go down from here. So here we're just ordering by the revenue column, and you see that Texas is the state with the most revenue. And then we want to plot it. So here in Jupyter, if you want to plot something, it's often just 1 or 2 lines of code. So we're calling the bar function from the Plotly library. And then here we're creating a bar chart. There it is. Okay, and yeah, I mean, it's it's a pretty simple chart, right? But it's also just one line of code, and it's still it's like quite interactive, and then you can hover over it and see the values by state. And of course, you could create something more complex, like a map or something, but then it'll take a bit more code. Let me show you one more plot that we do with our TM1 data. Like you could do here, we're using our data frame that we retrieved, and then we're building a histogram. And then you could see like the gross, how many states have a gross margin of 2 to 3 million. All right, that's just an illustration of things you can do. And just two more things maybe. If a power user was doing this and trying to do some analysis, and now he recognizes that he needs a new calculation. So he can just express that here in pandas. He doesn't have to go back to the rules, even though in that particular case, we're calculating a gross margin in percentage. And I would argue that you should do that in a rule, but now let's just do it here in pandas. And you see, it's quite simple. And in fact, it almost resembles the rule syntax, right? Dividing the gross margin by the revenue, and then we get a new column here. And now, so to finish it off, we can also bring it to Excel. Here we're using the library Excel Wings, which just opened this Excel sheet for us. And now, which is quite cool, right? You have all the data in Excel. And now, like just to finish it off, you could also go backwards. If we change it here, we want data back in Jupyter. Now you see where you have the updated revenue here. And then if you also like to finish the loop, you could write it back to TM1. So it's a new way to interact with your data. And you may say everything we did, we just could have done in Excel. That's correct. But with Python, you could go way further, right? I mean, people use this for time series forecasting or like these kind of things. And then because it's all code, you could also deploy it. So it means you could have something run overnight. And it's so that's the use case. That would be the first one. Okay, now, thank you. If you have any questions, just put them in the chat. I'm happy to discuss that afterwards. Now let me show you the second use case. So I mentioned that TM1py can be very handy to solve problems that are like multi-instance. So one problem that you may come across is that you have two instances. You see, we have the same dimension opened in two models, and it's not equal, right? And that in many environments, it's a problem. If the dimension has the same name, it should have the same hierarchy, right? So and this problem is kind of hard to address without TM1py. And now let me show you how we can solve this problem with TM1py. And so the first thing I want to do is to check if they're equal, and then I want to equalize them. Okay, so we're going to use a different tool now. It's a little bit less visual. It's a bit less good looking maybe than Jupyter. But if you're writing more complex scripts, it's the way to go because it's more powerful. It gives you more help, support, auto-completion, all that stuff. So here you see a little bit of code. It's actually not too complex. So we're defining a dimension name, which is the name of our dimension, planned apartment. Then we're connecting to two instances, TM1 source, TM1 target. And then here we are retrieving the dimension from the source. And we also retrieve it from the target. And then all we do is a compare. We just say, if dimension target is not dimension source, print out dimensions are out of sync. Now we execute it. And I hope it's going to say that the dimensions are out of sync. Yeah, you see it. It figured out that they're out of sync. And now probably you want to know what the differences are. And you can do it. But I want to go down a different route. What I want to show is how we can fix it. We can just build a script that sort of, is it in sync? If not, just sync it. OK, let me show you the next script. This one. So again, you see, it's like really little code. It's like 2 lines of actual code where we're defining the dimension name, we're connecting to 2 instances, and then we're retrieving the dimension from the source, and then we're calling the update method on the TM1 target. And now if we run this, okay, so it finished. now let me show you the 2 dimensions. All right, so you see it's back in sync. Oh, but you probably noticed that the attribute values are missing. So we have the structure of the hierarchy is back in sync, all the elements exist, but TM1py, just like the REST API, doesn't consider attribute values to be part of the dimension. So we have one more little script that we have to run, which is this one. So that's the third script that, again, the start of the script is the same, which is connecting to both instances. And then what we do is we define an MDX query that defines a slice in the element attributes cube, essentially the full cube, like the 1 dimension on the rows, 1 on the columns, and then it retrieves the values and pushes it into the target instant. And because the dimensions are exactly the same, because we just did it, this works. So it's really efficient because we're just retrieving the values and we have the MDX that sort of describes the slice. We can run it. And yeah, should take a second or two. Here we go. And now if we double check, here we go. The aliases are back in sync. Okay, and
Awesome.
it's actually, yeah, it's actually pretty simple, right? It was like 3 lines per script. And the key point is here that it could, now I showed it for 2 instances, right? But it could be 1 master instance and 10 satellites. Or it could be 1 instance on-premise and 1 in the cloud. This is the kind of flexibility that TM1py brings, that we're totally independent. We express our logic and then we can connect to like whatever we want. Okay, I will move to the next sample. So this is, again, a bit more visual. It's Power BI, for those who don't know it. Everything we see here in this dashboard, it comes from TM1. It comes from a cube. And you see that here on the right, we have data sets. And those are, those are retrieved with TM1py. And then once you have those defined, you can build a dashboard. And everything you see here is built with drag and drop. It's actually, like, from a usability perspective, I think it's a really good tool because it, like, the way you can build those reports and use them is really interactive and like almost Excel-like. Okay, you see that it seems to be a good dashboarding tool. And now let me show you how we bring data in from TM1. So here on the left, you see those 3 tabs. This is the reporting tab. So we have to move to the data tab. And now here you see, again, those different data sets. So here's one for the business unit dimension. Here's one for the customer dimension. And if you look closely, you'd see that this is the element name, that's the type. And then we have all kind of attributes from the dimension and a level. And here it says, I mean, this is a very simple dimension with just 1 total consolidation. But if it had a more complex, like, sort of tree on top, you would see all the different levels for each member. And if you had assigned names to those levels in TM1, it'll also retrieve the names. Okay, now to get to the point, let me show you how we retrieve it from TM1. So here on those 3 dots, you can click on Edit Query. And then it's all a bit slow. I think that's because I'm sharing my screen. Hope you don't mind. And here in the Power Query Editor, you can click here on the source, and then it opens a little Python console where you see we have a tiny little bit of Python code. And this retrieves the table as you've seen, the customer dimension. And it's a bit hard to read here. Let me execute this code in Jupyter. So you see what it gives us is exactly the table that we have seen in Power BI. And what it means is that we're connecting through Python, but with our security. And that's the good thing about this approach, that my security for my user applies. And if you're using TM1py with single sign-on, You don't have to provide a password or anything. So that's how it works. I mean, if there's a different side to this, right? There's a question: is Power BI a good front end to TM1? And the answer is it depends. I'm happy to take that discussion later, but to get data into Power BI is fairly straightforward with this approach. All right, the next sample, that would be connectivity. Let me show you something. So the other day, a customer asked us if it was possible to bring data from a Google Sheets into a TM1 cube. And now the immediate answer would be no, we can't do that. But then now with TM1py being available in our portfolio, we can actually do it. And I'll show you, it isn't actually that complex. Whether you want to do it and whether it makes sense, that's a different question. But you know, normally you've done a webinar about this similar use case a few weeks ago, and I showed to load exchange rates. Of course, that's an obvious use case. But what I want to show is that also, like inside your company, there's also things that you may want to retrieve into your TM1 model. And now let me show you how we can retrieve data from a Google spreadsheet into TM1. So let's change this to 8,000 first or something. Now let me show you where we want to see the data. So that's like a budget cube. Okay, so see, just to prove that it's not just smoke and mirrors, doesn't show 8,000 yet. And then I actually built this yesterday for the sake of this demo. So you see here in Google, we have defined named ranges for this sheet. So we have one called budget_data, which sort of describes the slides with the column headers, the row headers, and the values. And then we have two more, one for the department and one for the version. And that theoretically makes it like abstract enough to roll it out. Okay, and now we need a Python script that connects to this sheet, right? And retrieves the version and the department, then retrieves the grid, maps it into a structure that TM1 understands, and writes it to the cube. And let me show you that. All right, so you see this is a bit more complex, but it's just like 45 lines with a lot of empty lines. So the first thing is here, we're defining a spreadsheet ID. This is essentially the spreadsheet ID from the URL. It's pretty simple. You can just copy and paste it. Then here we have our authentication stored like just in a little file at the side. And then we can, this is like all of the housekeeping work. And then we can already go ahead and access the sheet. And you see there's a function called get here, which takes the spreadsheet ID and the named range. And then, so in order to retrieve the version, we're just calling this function. And then I don't know why, but it always gives you a matrix back. And so this named range just has one cell. So we have to say this grid and column 0 and row 0. Here we go, we have our version, right? From here. And then we do the same thing for the department. And then we do the same thing for the grid, the actual budget data. You see here it says budget data. So we've got our grid again. And then, yeah, you can imagine it's, even with Python, it takes a few lines to bring this into a shape that TM1 would understand. The way we sort of doing it is we're just looping through the rows, and then we're looping through the items. And you see down here, we're sort of building a map between the 4 dimensions and the value. So we say the period, the version, the department, and the measure, this tuple defines the value from the cell. And then here we're just calling one function, the write values from TM1py. And yeah, if we execute this, it should say 8,000 in the cube. So let me show you that cube. Here we go, it worked. So that's all I wanted to show, actually.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you very much for your efforts and putting that together for us. So we'll move through to some questions. So Joan Greenwald The last time I looked at TM1py only allowed native login. Have you updated this yet?
Yeah, we've updated that. It must have been a long time that you haven't looked at it. We've implemented CAM login with a username and password and namespace, and also allows you to single sign on with CAM. And actually, just last week, so we do have single sign on with CAM. And last week, we also built the integrated login with integrated security mode 2 and 3 to obfuscate your code so that it is somewhat encrypted. Well, you can turn your Python script into an executable. With there's a good library called PyInstaller. If you want, I can send you a link, and then you have a compiled version of your code. I guess that answers the question.
Yeah. Okay. All right. And from Nitish, while doing server-to-server transfers, I have to change the instance name for a lot of web reports by macro. Can TM1py help me there?
Oh, that's funny. Someone asked the same question. I understand this as when you like copy down the prod to engineering, and then all the PAX reports, they're still pointing to prod. Is that what you want to change? Is that, I don't see the question anymore. Sorry, can I just?
Sorry, so while doing server-to-server transfer, I have to change the instance name for a lot of web reports by macro. Can TM1 help?
Well, currently no, but someone requested exactly that feature. So there's a pretty good chance that we can build it.
It's coming soon.
Yeah.
Fantastic. All right. And secondly, from Nitish there, can I sync the data between the servers as well as the DIMs just as shown?
Well, it's a tough one. Depends on the data. If you like, we've used it at other companies with like small cubes that have manual input. Absolutely. TM1py also gives you a way to, you know that the REST API supports delta requests, so you could sort of pull just the latest inputs from the transaction log. We have used it successfully to sort of sync manual cubes across instances, but I don't think you want to sync a cube with 40 GB, right? I hope that's not what you're looking into, but for the dimensions, definitely you can sync them. And you can also, if you write it smartly, you could just first check if they're still in sync, and if not, sync it. So that you could totally do. And for the data, it depends. I hope that answers your question.
Okay. And while updating attributes between instances, if the target or source has additional attributes, how would it do the update?
Yeah, that's a good one. You know, in the demo that I showed, I was sure that the element attributes group are exactly the same, so I could use this shortcut. If you're not sure, then what you have to retrieve is sort of like a Python dictionary with tuples and values, right? You would say like the city of the customer is Portland, and then you would sort of store it as a map, and then you would send it to the other instance, and then it wouldn't be like in my case it was 2 lines of code, then it'll be 5, but that's not a problem.
Fantastic. And what does the roadmap look like for the next release of TM1py?
Well, I think it depends. It depends on what the community wants. It's a community project. We're trying to create value for TM1 and for people using TM1. So whatever people need. I have some technical things I want to look into. I think we could get better speed if we were using batch requests, and also like there's like a way to like sort of shrink your JSON with I think it's called compact JSON. So there's a few things we could look into to get more speed, but functionality wise, it's really up to the community.
Fantastic. Excellent. All right. Well, I think if anyone else has any more questions, pop them in there now. I guess is there anything else that you'd like to add, Marius, in the meantime?
I'm surprised there's no questions about Power BI. I thought it's a controversial topic.
Well, let's jump on it then. So I guess if you didn't want to use Power BI, what should people be looking at?
Yeah, there's a few things because Power BI does its own aggregations, and that's really unintuitive from a TM1 perspective, right? So it means that you bring in like a certain aggregated level, like let's say month, and then it's going to aggregate the quarters and the years. And that means if you have C rules in TM1, for instance, you just wouldn't see them. I think that's a real problem, like because you don't want to replicate logic from the TM1 core hard in the front end, right? These kind of things you have to be really careful. And also Power BI always has a weight of 1. And I mean, I think it's a good dashboarding tool, and I'm sure it can create value, but it's just not good. I mean, it's not good TM1 front end on itself, right? It doesn't have drill through. It doesn't even have a cube viewer, right? These kind of things you have to look into.
All right, and I guess what would you recommend?
I'd recommend if you have users who really want it, they can have it, right? But they're missing out on a good cube viewer and other things. And yeah, that's what I would say.
Fantastic. And is there a better front end that? Or sorry, what is the best front end is probably the better question. Right?
I'm a backend guy. I'm not the right person to answer that question.
Maybe another session. Excellent. All right. So that looks like that wraps up the questions there. All right. So I guess outside of that, guys. Again, if you haven't signed up for the TM1 Horizon conference, the CubeEyes are putting on, please do so. I say that link is in that chat now. It'll also be in the follow-up email to this webinar. So if you missed that, it'll come through to you anyway. Outside of that, Marius, thank you so much for putting your time and efforts into preparing and sharing with us. And yeah, thank you everyone else for attending. I know some of you have woken up at crazy hours in the morning to be here. So love your commitment. Thank you very much. And we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Marius.
Have a good day.
Cheers. Thanks, guys.